Good evening again. I'd like to call the Committee of the Whole for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, October 5th, 2020 to order with roll call, please.
Dudek.
Here.
McAlpine.
Here.
Walrath.
Here.
Weinhammer.
Here.
Collier.
Here.
Cavelli.
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Moving to the public comment, is anybody here would like to, the one additional person here, anything to say to the Committee of the Whole? We'll go ahead and close public comment at 7:05. And just another reminder for those that are watching this video, we are experiencing some technical difficulties with our video. You are able to hear it through audio. We will post the video from Zoom the village meeting from Zoom in its entirety in the next day or two. Moving to the first item of discussion is regarding the electric municipal aggregation.
Mayor, Village Board, this is just continuing the conversation that we had at the last Committee of the Whole meeting. As you may recall, we had David Hoover from NIMAC here presenting about a new aggregation program that we have the opportunity to take advantage of. We've done an aggregation program before, saved a lot of money for our residents from about 2012 to about 2017. This is a little bit different of a program. The energy markets have readjusted since that time. The program that was laid out by Dave Hoover had offered an opportunity here to contract with Elego for the supply of electricity, and we had 4 options to consider, and that's what we're just looking for your feedback tonight on how you'd like to proceed with that program. So if you recall, and what's before you is a green energy option that would vary from 0% green energy, 25, 50, and 100%. And within each one of those, the civic contribution, so the payment that comes back to the municipality, Cary, would change based on our level of green energy. So got some feedback, obviously, at the last meeting, but would like to lock this in. For whatever it's worth, I do think that we focus either on the 0 or 100%, getting and reflecting on some of the feedback that we received at the last meeting. And wanting to have that message of supporting green energy. I do think that maybe it makes sense for us to consider that at 100% based on what I heard from the village board previously. But we'll open it up to receive any feedback from you. Additionally, too, I'll point out in the Committee of the Whole, the agenda item before you, there was a request for potential green projects, and we've included that as well. So just looking for any feedback that you have, and just to narrow down the options, again, looking at potentially either 0% or 100%.
Any feedback on this? Staff is actually, just to remind you, they're looking for their recommendation is either 0 or 100%.
Jake, I was just curious, did you have any feedback on the establishment of a fund or sub-fund or anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up, Trustee Dudek. That was brought up by you at the last meeting. Had a chance to have conversations with Finance Director Descharme about that. Our recommendation, if the board wanted to set aside funds for sustainability account, that it would be either within the general fund or would be in the capital projects fund, that we just have an escrow account that would be established in either one of those funds to hold that money. It wouldn't be, our recommendation wouldn't be to set up a separate sustainability fund. So that is also, a consideration point here once, we kind of decide whether it's 0 or 100%, that civic contribution, then would we want to put it into that escrow account for some of these green initiatives? If not, I'd recommend either the general fund or just the capital projects fund. Thank you for bringing that up.
If I could direct a question to Director Morimoto on the first 2 items on there, what approximate cost does the village have for the annual tree planting and the streetlight LED conversion? So we can look at those 2 items, which are on our regular basis anyway. We're spending money on those to begin with. What are the costs of those so that we can compare them to what these contributions are?
Certainly. Currently, we only maintain a repair and maintenance budget for replacing existing streetlights as they need attention or as they burn out, so to speak. So currently, that fund would not address the need to replace all the remaining streetlights that we do have. So we would recommend, however, that just think of the costs of the lights that are remaining. They do encompass mainly the more expensive Cobra head style, so the more say the traditional style streetlights. We've been able to chip away and actually address all the smaller coach light style lights that are located throughout town in our parking lots. So this amount of money would help us chip away at it, but it wouldn't make a substantial dent in the number of lights that do remain.
I'll give you my feedback. So I personally, because this is a one-year contract, I opt for the 0% and that we allocate the funds towards whichever. At this point, we would need to decide which of these programs we're doing. But I think that the messaging is that we could absolutely say to our residents, anyone that's asking, we are looking to do green projects, but we want control over which green projects we're doing. And I think we can revisit it in a year. If this was a 3-year, I might opt for something different, but because it's a 1-year program, I would recommend, my thought would be the 0 and use this towards some of these projects, find out what those costs would be and use it towards that.
Ellen, I'll second your position. I originally thought 25% just so that we could sort of advertise that we're using green. But if we put the money towards true green projects, I'd rather have 100% of the money than 75% of the money. So I too would support 0.
Thank you. Trustee Weinhammer, where are you with this?
So when I spoke to Jake, he said there's, and maybe the board can tell me of something that would be a negative thing for going in at 0%, but he didn't have anything that he could share with me. So then I would be going for 0% as well.
Trustee Walworth?
I'm looking at something that we can actually accomplish with it, being it's a 1-year contract. It's not a commitment. It's not something to the idea of having a trust where we continually build towards it. This is a one-time. We have to view it as a one-time only, and if it repeats, great. We can deal with that situation then. So I would be more inclined than I was during our last discussion to look at the 0%. And then find something tangible we can accomplish in the green space for $47,000, not chipping away at a little bit or a little bit of that, something specific that we can stand out there and say, this is what we're doing with that money. And if we choose to get in the same kind of program the next year, we can allocate it the same way.
Very good, thank you. Trustee Collier?
I'm still in favor of 0 also,
Okay.
which I was before, for the same reasons.
Trustee Cavelli?
I'm still in favor of 0 as well.
Well, I think that works out well. So we're going to go with 0.
Sounds good. The number, keep in mind that number's going to change a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's what it was now, but once we actually go and get the final bid number, it's going to fluctuate. But appreciate that feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the designation of pedestrian routes for snow removal. I think we're only adding a couple new.
Yeah, Eric's got a few
There it
slides
is.
to go over.
Thank you, Mayor. As the board may recall, every year we do a presentation to the Committee of the Whole and the Village Board to reaffirm the designated pedestrian routes for snow removal. So this is a secondary function of operation that is performed following the completion of our normal clearing of snow and ice from our roadways. And the areas that we currently have included in this in these maps are shown in blue on the maps. And what we're have before you this evening are a few changes, some of which are some recommended new additions. Others are areas that we recommend just including formally in the map, as they're areas that we're already traveling between existing designated snow routes, or that just makes sense because of some recent construction. So just going through some of the changes, which are highlighted in green. The first one is Spring Street, which is adjacent to our wastewater treatment plant, just because of our functions of traveling between well 8 and 9, which is just north of the plant and our main facility. And because we own the property adjacent, we already do clear that. So we thought it was appropriate just to show it on the map to show that we are doing it. So that's one that we're already performing. Making our way northward, the next one is the south side of West Main Street between Carroll-Algonquin Road and Briargate Road, over by the current Village Hall facility and Briargate School. That's the new sidewalk that was just recently completed with the Safe Routes to School grant. And that, of course, is adjacent to a heavily traveled pedestrian area with the school, and also is adjacent to an existing path on Carroll-Algonquin Road that we currently do clear snow from. Moving northward again, Silver Lake Road. So that's north of Three Oaks Road. It's adjacent to some sections of existing bike path along that collector roadway that are either already plowed by the Park District or by the assisted living facility that's at the corner of Three Oaks and Silver Lake Road. So that's another one where we actually are traveling that way anyway, on our way up to the Crystal Lake Road paths that we already maintain in this program. So that's another simple one that we're already passing through the area that we recommend just formally documenting in the map. Then going counterclockwise over to Industrial Drive, we do own the adjacent detention basin to the new Cary Municipal Center. So obviously with us occupying that facility very shortly, hopefully, we want to include that in our route as well, because our existing sidewalks and a little bit of path along Georgetown at that site. And then the last one over in Fox Trails, about 3 or 4 years ago, the new sidewalk that goes through the whole perimeter of that subdivision was completed on Fox Trails Drive north and south to complete that whole circle. We do get, each year, we do get requests from residents asking if that area would be included in the snow removal routes, because a lot of those properties that back up to that sidewalk, there's not great or convenient access for those property owners. So oftentimes those are not cleared. So we are recommending, with the number of pedestrians and the resident feedback we received, to add that one to our list. And it's also one that it will take a little bit of additional time, but I think it's also something that's relatively easy for us to attain, given that we're already traveling down that direction on the Carroll-Algonquin Road bike path. So it just completes a circle for us to turn around and complete that loop. So that's our recommendation, and we're welcome to hear any feedback the committee might have.
Thank you, Eric. Does anybody have any comments on this?
I would just ask Director Morimoto if there was any consideration given to the east-west path from Silver Lake Road back behind the junior high and all the way through on the north side of on Mig Trail and through that area back behind the schools. There's an east-west path through there that is fairly heavily trafficked as well, all the way from Silver Lake all the way over into Nighthawk.
I believe that's Park
District?
Is my cursor showing? Is this the correct area you're referring to?
Yes, absolutely. That is Park District maintained.
Yes, that path is on the Park District, Cary Grove Park property. So that one is not in our right of way for us to include in the program. But I can make the inquiry to the Park District to see if they would be willing to entertain that one, though.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, you've seen here that we're trying to focus around some of these high pet areas. I mean, the downtown, obviously, but around a lot of the schools.
And that's exactly where I was
And
going,
that
Jake.
one,
You got
yeah.
3 different schools there and a lot of pedestrian traffic through that area.
Yeah, and the one I get at the, Fox Trails one seems like a lot, but we do have a couple properties that the village owns down there. There's a detention area, and there's also the well house too, that we're shoveling in front of. And so we're already out there, and that's when we've kind of, we've took the calls about it, and we've talked about this one, and it makes sense, we think, to add that on there, so.
So is that completely, because I know a lot of when you first go on in the first entrance there, that there are no houses that would be responsible for doing it. So is that the entire path, is that there's no houses responsible for throughout the whole subdivision?
Well,
I'm only because I've got a big corner lot and I got to do the whole thing.
yeah, it
That's your
backs,
front yard.
it backs up,
I know.
your properties back
It's a-
up to it.
Okay.
Yeah, most
So
of the time.
it's similar to the new sidewalk that we have on Main Street there that
Sure.
Eric pointed out.
With the safe
It's a
schools.
lot for one property owner, and also it's tough for people to get equipment back there.
I wanted to
So
make
that was
that clear
part
so
of
that
the
people knew we were not picking, like saying, hey, we're going to pick this subdivision and we're going to do your sidewalks. So we don't have another subdivision coming and saying, I want mine done too.
Yeah.
So this is because the accessibility and how, as I know, when you go in there, there aren't houses necessarily abutting, it's not their front yard. But
Correct.
They need to do that.
I think
Correct.
most of them are the
Right.
backyards.
Correct.
Yeah.
Any other
I'm
comments?
fine with it.
Is it fine as proposed? I'm
Yes.
seeing a nod,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
It's a lot of
I
path.
think you got the information you needed, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. And we will bring this for, it sounds like with this consensus of the committee for the consent agenda at the next meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.
A lot of path.
Yep.
It's a good problem, I guess, right?
Moving on to the annual road program funding options.
Mayor, Village Board, we've got kind of a team discussion here, so Eric's going to chime in with a few slides, and also Mike Descharme is on the call as well to talk about the financing component of it here. So I think most of you are familiar with the budget discussions that we had, most specifically during our 5-year CIP discussions, where we talked a little bit and had a little bit more information this year about, our road system, our road network, where we're going, some of the funding challenges that we had, and wanted to pick that up here and have a little bit more broader conversation with the village board and get your feedback. So the good news right out of the gate, the good news is that we're at a payment condition index, a PCI rating of slightly over 70, right around 70, which I know there's a lot of communities that would love to be in the position where we're at right now. But we've got to think about the future. And we've talked to a couple board members offline of, we've seen some of our neighboring communities issue pretty substantial debt, have to work to find other funding sources because their roads aren't in the position that we are now. We don't want to pick on them, but that's not where we want to be. And we got to look out for our future. And so that's why we want to talk about this, want to get any feedback that you have regarding these future funding options. So Eric's going to go over and just give a little bit of a background on one of the slides that we have within the packet and talk about where we've been from a road condition index, and then through various funding scenarios, where we may end up over the next 10 years. And then Mike will talk about some potential options for us to chat about, to consider. From a funding standpoint. So not looking for any decisions tonight. This is purely just informational, looking for your feedback and having the discussion. So I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thank you, Jake. So as you mentioned, I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of kind of where we are at with our road system currently, and a little bit of background and a little refresher from our CIP presentations with our capital improvement program on how we fund our road improvements currently. So right now, our road program is funded entirely with the motor fuel tax that we receive on an annual basis. That motor fuel tax is only allowed by law to be used in certain manners and of certain approved uses. The four main ones I show on the slides here with regards to design and construction for road resurfacing and road improvements. You can use it for your local share of grant-funded infrastructure projects. And as it's tied to road maintenance, road salt is another allowable use. And those first three that I just mentioned are the current ways we do utilize our MFT funds. And the last one predominantly used for MFT is the just other roadway maintenance, whether it be items like sidewalk and curb replacements, traffic signals, and so forth. On the upper right corner of the slide is just a little table that kind of shows the impacts and the cost differences associated with road improvements, looking from left to right over the years. We just showed what would happen with an assumed 3% increase in unit costs. Obviously, like many commodities, and especially these days, that amount will vary. But just to kind of show the significant impact over a 10-year span at 3% per year, you can see having to reconstruct and repair a substantially failed roadway with a PCI of less than 10. You could start out at $14 a square foot in today's dollars, that we're projecting with our consultants for next year, going all the way up to over $18. So you can see that every year, just like everything else, costs go up and the amount of roads that we would be able to resurface with a fixed amount of dollars per year, like we do get with, relatively speaking, with MFT, that buying power decreases over time. And then, of course, the other factor going top to bottom in that chart, it is significantly more expensive to replace a failed road than it is to just mill and take off the top surface layer of asphalt and put a thinner layer back on. If you're repairing a roadway that's highlighted in yellow and that's that fair to poor condition, at $4 to $7 a square foot, it almost doubles when you're trying to repair a road and rebuild it completely. And then lastly, in the bottom right corner of that slide, just for reference, we do pay for road salt currently with the MFT fund. And you can see that unit costs per ton for road salt just in the last 5 years have gone up about 18%, from just under $60 a ton to over $70 a ton in our current budget year. And this real quickly, just Jake had mentioned the pavement condition index, so that PCI that we have of a network average in the the bottom end of the satisfactory range, which is kind of our strategic goal that we aim for. This just shows you some examples currently of roads in Cary that are in these different PCI ranges, from a relatively brand new road like Georgetown in the upper left, all the way down to a road that is in the, it's not failed, but it is in a very serious condition in the lower left. And then this is a slide from our CIP presentations. This was the latest survey we had done. So all the village streets were driven and analyzed with the help of a consultant to give a current rating for those PCIs of every street. So while we do have a network average overall in the satisfactory range, you can see there's not a lot in the middle. We have some really great roads from all the excellent work that our team and our contractors have been able to do over the last several years, but we still have 23% of our roads in the poor or worse condition, which are in the orange and shades of red on the map. And this is the slide that was included in the budget packet. So what we are showing here are 3 different scenarios of funding, just to give an idea of what types of impact different levels of dollars that we would put into our road program can have on our overall PCI. So starting backwards, we also look back the last 10 years. So in our current funding model, what we have seen incur with our PCI averages, depending on the road programs that we put in place. So back in 2010, that was the last time that bonds were issued for an infusion of about $5 million over 3 years for a road program to help boost what at that time was a network average that was below 70 in the fair range. And you can see, following the conclusion of that program, it went from in the high 60s to the upper 70s. And then with the current MFT allotments that we had over those years, we were able to maintain a relatively steady condition for our roadways. But of course, as these roads that are in the fair or poor condition, as they age, it's not a linear drop in condition. It oftentimes can be a steep drop. So once they hit a certain condition, they will go from being pretty reasonable, not too bad, to horrible really quick. And you can see some of the age of these roads that were getting older in the lower end of the PCI range did have a significant impact over time, just in a short amount of time. So we went from PCI of the high 70s up to, in 2019, to the mid 60s. We did utilize some favorable bidding results and some groupings of some larger road programs the last couple of years. And we also were able to take care of some of the worst pavements that we had, kind of going a worst first approach for a couple of years. I usually like to group the roads in geographic locations where we can, but we did need to focus on some of the more poor streets out there, which did have a major impact in bumping our PCI back up to the 70s. But again, we're looking at a big cluster of roads that are in that poor or fair condition. So over time, from this point forward, we will see, based on the modeling we've done with our payment management software, a decline over the next 10 years with our current funding model. And that is shown in the red line. So we'd start at just under 72 for network average. Just using our MFT money that we have currently, we will be in the poor range for network PCI by 2030. if we were just to have no road program at all, and just for illustration purposes, not that we'd ever do this, but if you put $0 towards our payments, it would obviously fail quicker, getting to that poor level right around 2028. Now, the two scenarios that we then outlined separately from just using our current MFT revenue model. The first one would be if we were to issue, similar to the early 2010s, a $5 million bond issue and have that in addition to our current MFT allotments. That is the line in blue. So those first 2 years, we'd have two $2.5 million road programs, along with a hefty balance that we'd be able to accumulate from our regular MFT. We'd be able to sustain then getting back to $1 million every other year in the latter half of this window. We would be able to keep our PCIs in the fair range well into up until 2031. And then the third scenario would be just to utilize our current MFT, but only add the additional revenue from a potential new natural gas utility tax. That only adds about $350,000 every 2 years to our current MFT allotment. So that's why you can see from the red line of our current MFT only to the green, it is improvement, but it's not a substantial improvement, because in the today's dollars and the dollars moving forward, $175,000 a year or $350,000 every few years doesn't pave too many streets at that rate. So it is a small improvement, albeit any improvement is always helpful, but you can see that there's just a nominal impact on our PCI average. And this is just the same slide, just focusing just on the from current 2021 years moving forward. And I can then turn it over to Mr. Ducharme for some additional comments on funding.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, Michael.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Yep.
At the present time, based on our current road program, where Eric could use an additional $430,000 a year in order to maintain our roads. One of the concerns that I have is knowing the finances of the Village of Cary, for us to generate an additional $430,000 would require us to approve new revenue sources in order to make that happen. Presently in the general fund, within the operating budget, we simply don't have excess revenue to allow us to transfer $430,000 to cover a road program. Looking back, similar to what was done in 2008, in an attempt to identify how much funding would be required if we wanted to issue bonds again to try and maintain the road network, to issue $5 million of bonds would require us to come up with a new funding source of approximately $482,000. Those bonds would be paid back over a 15-year period, but it was worthwhile to look at because we'd be able to take advantage of the current low interest rates. And the example that I provided in your packet showed a debt service schedule where the net interest cost for that 15-year period was 1.95%. My concern going forward is it's not going to be any cheaper for us to maintain the village's road network. Unless we continue to add funding to attempt to keep our roads in that satisfactory condition, is going to require us to provide that additional funding that we're looking for. I realize that to issue bonds and to come up with a new revenue source that generates 480, roughly $500,000 a year is not an easy thing to consider. But I also want the board to understand that if we continue to let the roads deteriorate, what is going to cost us $400,000, $500,000 a year now will only go up from there. And as roads fail and those costs rise, it will require more and more funding. I always have to remember that Cary's a non-home rule community, which means we are very limited in the revenue sources that we have available to us to adopt. In the packet, in the memo for tonight's presentation, we provided you with some possible other revenue sources that the board could consider to attempt to fund the deficit we're looking at related to the road program. Many of those revenue sources that are shown in the packet by themselves or by considering a natural gas utility tax or a cable franchise fee or an eating establishment tax, none of those on their own would generate enough money to cover what we're looking for at this time. The other alternatives we have would be to issue vehicle stickers, which I think the village did do at one time, which is an option that's available to us. And although it is a lot of administrative work to deal with a vehicle sticker program, it would generate the funds that we need, and the cost would be borne by anyone who has a vehicle registered in the village of Cary. So it's a cost that is equally passed on to all vehicles here, all of our residents, any vehicles registered to businesses. The other things that we could consider would be a non-home rule sales tax. But in order to impose that, we would have to go out to referendum, and it would have to be approved by a majority of residents in the community. The same thing would hold true if we just decided that maybe we wanted to increase our property tax levy. Again, we would have to go out for referendum in order to make that happen. If you'll recall, back in 2008, when the last time the board issued bonds for roads, an electric utility tax was approved, which provided the revenue that was needed to allow the village to issue alternate revenue bonds, which did not require referendum. If we were interested in issuing bonds this time, we would need to come up with a revenue source that would generate 1.25 times the annual debt service in order to be able to issue bonds again without having to go out for referendum. My overall concern in looking at any of these options, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions related to them, is I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Are there any questions that you have at this time?
I think too, just to wrap it up, I mean, we're in a good spot right now. You know, we've got a PCI rating of 70, but to maintain that, our message is we've got some work to do. We got to continue to work the problem, and you know, we're not going to solve it right away. But these are some options that we wanted to bring to you again to talk about, have you chew on, to consider, talk with your fellow board members about, because you can see just the trend lines that we've shown here is that we just can't stay at the PCI rating of, our strategic objective 70 without some additional funding. So with that, any one of us is available for any questions that you have right now.
Jake, could I add one other thing?
Absolutely, Mike.
Just to be totally transparent, one of the concerns that I have is over the past few years, we have, related to the budget, we have pretty much utilized all of the reserve funds for the most part in the capital projects fund. And at this point in time, we do not have a dedicated revenue source for the capital improvement program. Since we took over Rotary Park, we no longer have the funding from Meyer Material on an annual basis, which was used to fund all of the village's vehicles and equipment. In the past couple of years, we've started to lease vehicles to maintain the remaining balance that we have in the vehicle replacement fund. My concern in wanting to address the road program sooner rather than later is at some point we will reach a point in time where we will need funding for all of those capital projects, vehicles, and then have to deal with the roads at the same time. I have been around long enough that I understand how the board views revenue increases, property tax increases, but I know that day is coming where those hard decisions are going to have to be made in terms of generating the funds needed just to keep us going as we have for the past however many years.
I think there's a lot to take in here. We're not looking for any immediate answers right now, but those of you thinking of other opportunities or whatever those are that are against any type of property tax increase or other revenue, and on the same that are for this, we need to come together as a board to decide how we're going to move this forward. It's not an easy conversation to have. I would ask that you reach out and talk to me or Jake or Michael to talk about these additional revenue sources. It's not an easy conversation to have. It really is not. But when you look at some of the charts that have been presented here right now, and the cost of maintaining a decent road is substantially cheaper than completely rebuilding it. I've gone to many different seminars on that, and they say if you got a failing road, just let it fail because it's not going to get any worse than it is right now. But we have an obligation to our residents and our businesses to provide safe roadways, and we have to look at this. And Michael hit the nail right on the head. I was going to, if it wasn't said, talk about our capital improvement funds. We do not have a source to refund that fund, to look at the things that we have ahead of us. So we need to work together. We need to think about things and try to think outside the box. How can we do this effectively at an affordable price for our residents? I think it's important that we talk to each other and figure some of these things out. We've been talking about this behind the scenes, about rolling something like this out just to educate. We've got new board members, we've got older board members that have come back, and we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, that they know what is available for us to utilize. And I think Michael did a great job explaining what these are. Eric is, as usual, right on the target when it talks to what our roads need. And we need to be aware of these things moving forward. Because 2031, guys, it's not that far away. So, some of us will be here, some of us won't. Some of us won't be here, some of us will. So we want to make sure that we're setting our village up for success moving forward. So I'd love to hear what people have to say. If you want to talk about this offline, that's fine. If you want to interject some comments now, that's fine as well. But staff is looking for some feedback from you.
I got a question. When Michael, you mentioned that on the new revenue options that on a standalone, one of them will not bring us up to speed, but what combination does for what we're looking for here?
Yeah, I agree. We don't know what the amounts are for some of these. I'd like to know like how much, if we did a vehicle sticker, and I know we don't know, but do we have a rough idea of how much, what are people normally charging for those type of things? How many vehicles do we have? How much do we think that would generate? Because I think we need some of those numbers.
Well,
Because I don't think, I don't see people really going to be running towards raising property taxes or non-home rule referendum.
To give you some idea, I could say that the natural gas utility tax would generate about 175,000. If there was any interest at all in having a vehicle sticker, the first thing that I would do is pay to get a copy from the Secretary of State's office of all the vehicles that are registered currently in the village of Cary. That would give me an adequate number in terms of the number of vehicles that are here. And based on that number of vehicles, we could then see what the vehicle sticker fee would have to be to generate whatever sum of money it is that you'd be interested in looking at.
We can make that happen.
Yeah, I just think that that's important to have as much information as we can so that we can kind of make well-informed decisions.
I would just
or not.
say for that one, I would caution against it. People need a vehicle to get from point A to point B. If they have to buy a vehicle sticker and they're already having a tough time even affording a vehicle, then they go ahead and they get a ticket for not having the vehicle sticker. It's just like another thing, and they're just trying to get to work, or they're just trying to. So if we're looking at anything, I'm not in favor of any of this, but if you guys are looking at anything, I would suggest luxury taxes, like eating establishment tax or cable franchise fees, or things that are considered like a luxury tax, not something that
A necessity.
thank you.
Also, I find it concerning that even if we get a $5 million bond, we still drop to 60% in 3031. What does it take to maintain where we're at now?
I don't know if Eric can
It's
wave his hand.
substantial.
Right, it's double
Yeah.
that, right? More than double that.
It's substantial. But we're not looking to bite the whole apple. I mean, we're just
No,
looking
but
to
even
get
putting
some.
that amount of money in, we're still not gaining
Yeah.
ground or staying where we're at.
We're not
going
maintaining.
down
We're
regardless.
still going down.
Yeah, and one of the other things about the vehicle stickers too is it's an enforcement nightmare.
Yeah.
It is.
It's very difficult to, I think the chief would
Yeah.
chime in on it. It's very difficult to
I agree.
enforce something
I
like
agree,
that.
but I just think we need the facts, that's all.
We just, that's something that and this is good feedback. We can work on getting the different information. But we really encourage an open dialogue. Let's talk about some of these
On the
things.
motor fuel tax, that's only on sales of motor fuel, I understand, in this town. There's no way to increase the tax on that alone, or is
No.
that a set amount?
Well, then you also got to remember the MFT is paid, we get that, and it's, Michael, do you want to explain exactly what MFT is and where it comes from, the per capita and that? So with a declining population, we were at
So it's dropping.
271. Michael?
Sure. There are a number of state revenues that are generated back to municipalities on a per capita basis. Motor fuel tax is one of them. Replacement tax is another. Income tax is another one that's distributed on a per capita basis. Based on the collections, a rate is set, and based on your population, that is what a municipality receives each and every year. The numbers that you see in our budget for the revenue related to those items are based on the estimates for those per capita rates, and they're prepared by the Illinois Municipal League. We take those numbers directly off the charts, multiply them by our population, and those are the numbers that are posted annually. Unfortunately, that does not, especially in the case of MFT, allow us to keep up with the amount of road repairs that we need to in order to maintain that satisfactory rating.
And I'd add that recently the state of Illinois did change the way that some of that MFT was distributed, and there was an increase statewide, and a portion of that did go back to the local agencies. However, I think that increase did occur right about the time that the village started paying for road salt out of the MFT fund. So the net impact of that increase, unfortunately, was kind of muted by the fact that we did then take a chunk out of it for salt. The other point to note is that we did make an assumption just for modeling purposes over the next 10 years that our MFT revenue would be relatively steady, that our population wasn't going to be increasing or decreasing dramatically. So there's some assumptions in there. But the other part that's not factored into this model is what happens to the demand for fuel and the amount of gasoline purchased over the next 10 years. There are a lot of initiatives in the auto industry to move towards electric vehicles. And the timing of that, it won't be immediate, but that will inevitably have an effect on the amount of gasoline purchased and then hence the amount of money. If the current formula for distribution of funds stays the same, we may see a decrease over the next 10 years as well in that funding revenue.
Eric, while you're there, could I ask one other question? Normally, when a road is resurfaced, the life of that resurface is approximately 15 years. Is that accurate?
It will vary, correct, depending on the traffic and the type of subsurface conditions, but usually 15 to 20 years and carry with predominantly well-draining soils is what we typically expect.
If you look at the number of roads that were repaved back in 2008 and add 15, even 20 years to that, that means all those roads that were resurfaced under the village's last bond program should technically be coming due to be resurfaced again. So you can see kind of how quickly it happens that unless you stay up with the annual maintenance on these roadways, how quickly they can deteriorate. And once that happens, now what was a reasonable cost can sometimes be now double, if not triple that, to fix that road. And that again is one of my concerns, that there's only so much time I believe that we will have to be able to adjust to this before we start seeing more of our roads falling into that fair, poor, very poor condition rating. And the sum of money that we're going to have to look to generate then, I think will be eye-opening.
And Director Deschamps is correct. This concept of maybe issuing bonds and kind of getting a little insurgence of funds to address this 23%, these roads in the orange and the red conditions, that is what happens in those early years, which is why our network average in that blue line moves as well as it does. It's that 10 to 15 years from now that Mike mentioned. It's those roads that are now in this light green and yellow range, and maybe the high end of the orange range. Those are the ones that 15 years from now are going to be dipping into this orange and red zone. So it is a fortunate fact of life and a vicious circle that is not unique to Cary. Anybody that maintains a roadway system is facing the same challenge, but it is just something we need to be aware of and try to plan for the best we can. And a lot of the money that we do dedicate for pavement management practices like crack filling and the pavement rejuvenator to try and extend and flatten that curve to get that deterioration of the roadways to push that out a little bit longer and make the cost of the resurfacing cheaper down the road. Those are all excellent practices that we'll continue to do and obviously have had an impact in keeping our roads as in good of a shape as they are. But unfortunately the time has come where that's no longer going to be enough as well.
So I heard some more information related to the vehicle stickers. Is there any other further research that staff should do?
Yeah, I have a comment. Kim, did you have anything you want to say?
The only one that I was potentially interested in would be letting the residents vote on a referendum question. So for the non-home rule sales tax.
And I did not ask Kim this, but that was what I wanted to bring up, so I'm glad you did that.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think, like Daniel Burnham said, make no small plans. And we're at a point where, any one of these things is just sticking your finger in a hole in a dam. We really need to look at a bigger picture way to fund not only the general fund, but some of these big projects. And when you look at, to a couple of the comments that were made, when you look at these individual categories, they hit certain people. Certain people use the internet a lot more, others go to dine, others drive cars. Not everybody drives cars. So I tend to support something that is very widespread. And of course, in the case of sales tax is also being paid by people who don't live in Cary. So when you look at the different funding sources that you have outlined here, to me, the only one that goes outside the community is the sales tax one. And likely, I don't know what the numbers would be, but likely that would be the biggest source of revenue as well. So I had a question for Michael about when the earliest time for a referendum could even be brought up. Do you know what that would be? Or Jake, do you know when that would be?
I do not know. I think I defer to Scott on that one.
We'd have to look at that and get back to you.
And I think, as part of planning for that, there's so many good things that are going on in the village. Not necessarily always funded by the village, but funded by the taxpayers. I think the water park is a huge thing that people talk about. This might be an ideal time to, market the things that are happening in Cary, the good things that are happening, and tell people where, this additional money is going to be spent. Educate them a little bit. Don't just necessarily slap a tax on there when you go to eat and you find out that, your dinner cost you $5 more. You don't know where that money went. But put a program together to educate the community that we're looking at this. There may be a referendum 6 months, 10 months down the road, and tell them why. I think a person with common sense would understand that.
Yeah, I just had a conversation tonight at the National Net with a guy about, all the things that are going on, and it's, we do a really good job of managing our money. I said, well, hold on. It's like, yeah, it is, since, I think, I'll just say since I've been sitting in this chair since 2013, our line item on the property taxes has remained flat. We have not asked them for anything new. And I said, sometimes things have to change. But you go back to the education about what people want to hear and what they need to hear, and they need to hear it from us. We have to control the message. That being said, the latest surveys that we've just done coming from Village Hall, the number one thing that residents want are roads. That's their number one priority that they want is roads. And it's up to us to decide what's the best way that we can provide what our residents' number one concern is. And I think that if we roll it out, I tend to agree with, a referendum is a very tough thing to do. I think some of our adjoining municipalities failed miserably at referendums asking for the same things, for various things. I don't know if it's been roadways or whatever, but their referendums have not been very successful. So we'd have to really dig deep and figure out how we want to package this messaging up to the community. I think that by educating about what we've done, how we've been able to maintain our costs, and one of the things that I think that is important that people have to remember is that we do everything in our power to lower their costs of living in the village. And at some time, you have to take a bite out of it and say, look, we need to get to that next level. We have to provide for the future. There'll be other people sitting in these chairs at some point, and I don't want to be the board that's, sat on our hands and didn't do something proactive to provide the services that we need. And now is the time. I know Rick is going to jump all over this when I say this. The money is right now. We're never, like we're able to build that municipal center without a tax increase using existing revenue that we've already had. So we got an exceptional deal with the bonds, and is that the way we go? I'd love to hear what people think about that. I mean, we can do this, we can go out for a referendum, and are people comfortable doing that? So, and these are conversations we need to have, and encourage you to have conversations with me or other board members or staff, help you make an educated decision. But we have an obligation here that we've got to take a look at this seriously.
And to that point, Mayor, I would suggest that looking on the list of items supplied for us to consider, E, F, and G, the home rules, non-home rule sales tax, municipal streaming tax, and property tax increases, 2 of those require a referendum. If that, or 2 of those were, create a, if we're going out to referendum for something, we're throwing the onus back on the village to make up their mind. And in my view, this is what we were elected for, is for us to decide this is the best course of action. If those things fail, we are literally right back where we are right now. And we're much, much further down the timeline to having real serious road problems. And item F, the municipal streaming tax, doesn't seem to have enough information out there for us to really say we can lean on this as an opportunity. So again, that might be a solution in the future, but right now that might just be a pie
But
in
there
the
is a
sky.
lot of money, I think, to be made.
Potentially, very much so, because the cable franchise fees are going to do nothing but shrink over time as less and less people have cable.
Correct.
So to Trustee Kelly's point earlier is, listen, we need to look at all these options and decide if we're going to make an impact. We need to find out a way to make an impact and not have this same problem again 3 or 4 years down the road. If that includes having multiple options, maybe a smaller increase here, a vehicle sticker that's not onus, it's not hundreds of dollars per vehicle per year, but couple that with a small utility, natural gas utility tax, we need to look at combining those items so that we can set ourselves up for future positive road improvement versus, to Trustee Collier's point, 6 years down the road, even with this, we're right back into trying to figure out how we're going to pay for more road improvements. I'd rather try and take a bigger bite now and have a problem not be another problem again in a short term, that we solve it for a longer period of time.
And property tax increases are never a really fun topic to have, but when you look at our property taxes, I mean, we've taken new growth, which isn't a tax increase. This next year, we're forecasting an $11,000 new growth. That's nothing. If, Michael, I don't know if off the top of your head, if we were to do a property tax increase at the full increase that we have, is it still like around $60,000?
Mayor, I didn't hear the question. You were breaking up.
Oh, I apologize. If we were to do the full property tax extension of an increase, what would that be?
It'd be, well, the new growth is 11,000. From talking to Jake, I think the CPI that we'd be allowed to take was an additional $40,000.
I think that was all in, right, Mike?
Was that included this 11?
Yeah, I think it was including.
So we're not getting rich off that. When people get real nervous about that a big property tax, and people think we're going to double their taxes. We're not. I mean, since we are a non-home rule community, we do not have the ability to make these changes. So, I agree. We need to look at every one of these things and get some figures and plugging some of these figures in to see how things can kind of shake out. This is not the first time we're going to talk about this. We're just kind of wetting your whistle right now. And to get the information that you want. So if there's any other information that you see now that you can give to staff right now, we can work on getting some of these figures for you.
I think one of the things I'd like to see, you mentioned about the vehicle sticker, so you're going to do the homework to find out what that is. I would love to know what a 2% sales tax increase would mean to the village of Cary. I think that you have to have a number to work with before you realize if that's a good alternative or not. So I would like to know what that is. You've got the natural gas utility, and some of the others already are estimates. But, to Rick's comment, and I agree with, I think, what he's suggesting, and I just want to be clear that, yeah, you're right. A referendum generally speaking, doesn't have a high probability. But as, in my opinion, as part of the covering with the community of the potential for that, we already know what the options to that failure would be. The options to that failure will be, we're going to increase we may put in place vehicle stickers. We're going to probably put in place a natural gas. Those are things we can control.
Right.
So I don't mean this in a, flippant way, because I'm paying like everybody else, but it's either going to come from this pocket or it's going to come from this pocket. And when I look at this, I'll say it again, when I look at these options, the only one that's coming from my neighbors in Barrington or Crystal Lake or the trucks that drive through town is a sales tax. Every time those landscapers are at Thornton's buying Fritos and, sandwiches and pop, the likelihood is they're going to another community, but they're paying sales tax here. So that's why I think it's very, very broad-based, and it doesn't hit any particular group unevenly. And that's why I think that to understand how much we could potentially get from that category would be really, really important.
Any other immediate feedback you want? This is an open dialogue. Let's keep the conversation going.
I had one quick question. With
Sure.
all the federal spending and all that going on, was there no federal money coming in for road improvements in our communities in general?
We'll always look for outside money. There's no doubt about
But
that.
there
been
was
very
no
successful.
per se project that
Right
was
now, no,
spread
there's,
throughout.
and one of the other things I want, through Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, we are continuously working to get the full 10% back of the LGDF. Right now, we're at a little over 6. They're talking about bringing it back to, in the spring, bringing it up to 8%, and then eventually back. So those will help with plugging some of the holes that we foresee too. So, we're working on the back of the house on that, working with, and Speaker Welch he supports this. He supports the full 10%. So I think that'll help us moving forward. But, we don't have a magic wand here. We got to figure these things out together as a group to get us to that level that we need to be at. I think that the village made a decision a few years ago to reduce some of the cable fees, and I think what is Comcast? Are they at 4% now? And then AT&T's, I don't even think we
4.
charge it. Are
No,
they at
they're-
4?
yeah,
4.
4.
And we lowered it. The 1%. And to your point about the cable industry is tanking. I mean, really. I mean, people are going towards the streaming and that. So I think that's why the streaming tax might be something to look at, but it's brand new. I mean, there's not a lot of communities that are dipping their toes in this right now. We were talking about it through Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and everybody's they're taking a wait and see what's going to happen. I think Evanston is the one that's really capitalizing on it right now. So, I can keep you posted on that through my meetings with that, but right now, I'm not hearing a lot of people jumping on board on that right now. Any other comments or anything for staff right now? Thank you. Good conversation.
Thank you.
Next, discussion regarding annexation, an inquiry for 9606 Cary Algonquin Road parcel.
Thank you, Mayor. As the board may recall, back in August, a business in town came before the village board during public forum and indicated their interest in potentially annexing the property. They're looking at relocating within the village. Their desire is to stay within the village, but they do have a significant interest in this property and have inquired on the potential, if they were to acquire it, to have it annexed into the village of Cary. They are looking at other properties in the village as well, but this is the primary site that they were most interested in. A little background on the site: the property is located in the southeast corner of the intersection of Clausen Road and Cary Algonquin Road. Our comprehensive plan is silent towards this property, mainly because the village of Cary had a boundary agreement that we established with the village of Algonquin back in 1999 that established Clausen Road kind of as the southernmost boundary for Cary and northernmost boundary for Algonquin. When the comprehensive plan was put together, that agreement was still active. It expired back in 2019, the 20-year life cycle. So the comprehensive plan doesn't have any guidance as far as what type of land uses would be appropriate for this area. the northeast and northwest corners of the property, the comprehensive plan does recommend single-family residential development potential for those sites, which would be directly adjacent to this area. In looking at utilities, the closest utilities that we have to the site are located to the north at our village boundary. As you can see on the slide, the water line runs along Carroll-Gonkin Road and basically dead ends at that point. There's a little depressional area of a creek bed that runs in that location where there's a fire hydrant, and that's kind of the end of the water lines. The closest sanitary sewer line is in the Chancery subdivision, just off the screen, about 900 feet away from the subject property line. If the board is open to annexation of the property, kind of laid out kind of what the process would be, should we wish to pursue it with the business. Essentially, preliminary reviews this evening is to discuss if it's something that the village wanted to pursue, understand what the impacts of it would be. We would, from a staff perspective, if we have direction from the board to pursue it, we'd go back and draft an annexation agreement that would set out the details or the parameters for annexing the property and bringing it in the village, determining what the proper zoning would be for the property. Right now, I'd be recommending it be Zone B3, which is a fringe business district, which would allow for the type of use that they're looking to operate in this location. And then we'd have various meetings for the zoning board and village board to formally designate the zoning for the property and also formally annex it into the village. Total of this process, you're looking probably a quarter to half of a year, the time period before the property would be formally annexed in. The business is looking at potentially acquiring a property and moving within a year time period as their existing lease. So they're looking to move fairly quickly in this perspective. But happy to answer any questions the board may have on this item. Just looking for general feedback if it's something that you'd wish staff to have additional discussions pursue with the property owner.
Just for a matter of reference, we did have somebody approach the village board a couple years ago wanting to do the same thing, completely different operation. That was a wholesale landscaper. So this would be an existing business that's already in town that wants to stay in town. They're finding a good location, but this is the second time this has been asked of the village to consider something like this. Different use. What kind of questions does anybody have?
What's the cost around sewer and water to that property?
I don't know the specific costs. Actually, with the distance of how far the utilities are away from the property, likely they still would be not feasible for the property owner to connect upon annexation. Likely what staff would recommend and do the location of where the utilities are on the west side of the street. Under the county ordinance, they would not be required to tap into our services as well. But in the fact that the board wanted to pursue the annexation, the annex, we would probably draft some sort of condition within the agreement that should utilities ever be brought to the property line or within the close proximity, that they'd be required to connect at that point.
Could we, if we don't have to run them that far, can you tell them they would have to be on sewer and well, or no? If it's annexed, then they would have to have access to city water and sewer?
They would not have to have access if they annexed in. So the issue with how far the utilities are away from their property, they would not be required under county ordinances to connect to our utilities, so they still could operate on water and well and a septic system there. But should we ever extend utilities close enough to their property where they have to connect, we could require them to connect at that time.
Thank you.
What about, could there be a clause in there that says if their well fails or their septic system fails and they have to replace it, that then we require them to tap into our services because they're already spending a fair amount of money if those items do fail? I just curious on that.
It certainly could be a condition that we can look at within the agreement, so that if they have to replace an existing system on the property, that connection be explored at that point. Certainly it could be another topic at that point to review what the cost would be and determine whether or not that would be a feasible alternative at that point.
So they're already operating in town and they're primarily repair. So are they generating any sales tax for us? Do you know?
They have a small sales tax they do produce because they do resell some used appliances in their location.
And they sell parts.
Yeah, and parts. So there will be
Bought them.
a component to the business that would produce sales tax, but it's not their primary operation or primary drive for revenue that we would see.
Just a, kind of off the cuff remark, it's a beautiful piece of property to me with the woods all around there, and obviously now it's down the road from Cary Park. Has there ever been any interest in anyone putting residential in there at all?
Not that I've had inquiries on for our perspective. Most of the inquiries I've had for the other properties in the northeast and northwest corners have been commercial in nature, but I have not had inquiries for additional residential to be constructed.
Someday.
Yeah.
I would love to keep a business that's already in Cary and keep them within our village of Cary. They have a very good reputation. And if there's an opportunity for us to make this work, I don't want it to cost us anything. As I'm looking through this and discussed it, I'm not sure where there's a cost to us other than, the paperwork to get it done.
So
Agreed.
Jake, I had asked you earlier, what is the benefit for them annexing in? What was the reason why they want to do that versus staying unincorporated?
Yeah, it's more, they like being in the community from a perspective, but also there's different zoning controls that we would have of the property versus what the county would allow. They're generally wanted to be in the community in the village of Cary. I mean, they're looking at a dozen other properties throughout the community as well for potential relocation options. Their desire is this property just from aesthetics and how it works for their operation currently. But because it's not in the village, they had concerns with that, and we're more interested in having a property that's within the village that we would have more say over and control over from their use perspective.
They want to be in Cary.
Yeah, they want to be Cary.
I know you said that you were going to get back to me, so I just figured I'd ask now.
Any questions from this side, additional?
There's a fair amount of staff time that obviously goes into it and a fair amount of time too from the petitioner. So that's why we just wanted to connect with you and see if there were any significant reservations that we should be aware of before moving down this path. But it sounds like the board is supportive of us exploring this with the petitioner.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, discussion regarding the vacation of the village right-of-way near South Rossendale Road.
Thank you, Mayor. So in previous discussions, we had been given some direction to issue a survey to the residents that back up to an unused half right-of-way in the general area of South Rosslyn Bridge Road near Three Oaks Road. So we did issue letters to each of the residents that back up to those properties. And of the residents that responded, we had about 93% of the right-of-way that we currently own and maintain that has some interest from either one or both sides of the right-of-way. So that percentage is a percentage of the right-of-way, not the number of respondents, because their frontage does vary. So we only have a small section, basically, that we actually don't have any disinterest. We just didn't have a response from either side of the right-of-way at that particular location. So there still potentially could be a chance for 100% interest in that area. This may require a little bit of additional outreach. But we wanted to share the results of that survey with the committee and seek some direction on whether it is the desire for us to pursue the next steps, which would be some additional outreach with the residents and some more detailed steps in order to actually get the process started for the vacation of all or most of the right-of-way that we currently maintain that's shown in blue. I can answer any questions you might have. As I mentioned, we are interested in the feedback to see if there's a consensus for direction to proceed to the next step.
Is anybody against proceeding to the next step?
No.
I think you've got a unanimous move it forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much.
Next, I will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss real estate, setting the price of sale lease, Illinois 120/2C6, and closed session minutes reviews, Illinois 120-2C21.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are no opposed. We are adjourned into executive session.